We're heading live to Washington, D.C. now to join Donald Jensen. He's a former U.S. diplomat and professor of Russian foreign policy at Johns Hopkins University. Mr. Jensen, welcome to Al Jazeera. First of all, I just want to get your take on these peace efforts that are ongoing, a lot of back and forth. Do you think we're any closer to a resolution at this stage?
Well, frankly, thank you for having me on. I don't think we're closer at all. The major players, the U.S., Europe, Ukraine, and Russia, are constantly maneuvering for advantage. You saw Mr. Putin's remarks. You mentioned them about war in Europe. We're not close to war in Europe now. We may be in a couple of years, and that depends on the Ukraine sentiment. But Mr. Putin is playing a diplomatic game. He's engaging in hybrid warfare. By frightening the Europeans, he can exaggerate their divisions among themselves, and as you see, the Italians, the Germans, the French, and the British don't agree on what a final peace plan would be. And so as a result, we see President Trump, Zelenskyy, and the European leadership all maneuvering to get an outcome that they think will be in their advantage. And frankly, they're not close to an agreement on the three issues. Number one will be the framework for a peace, including land transfers. Number two will be economic reparations for Ukraine. And number three will be, the peace ceasefire or not as well. And the Russians are sitting back watching this, trying to manipulate it in a way that benefits them. Okay. And so far, they've had success because the Europeans, the U.S., and Ukraine do not agree where we are right now. In fact, I think that
you mentioned. Sorry, I'm just going to jump in there, Mr. Jensen.
Kyiv is now larger than it has been for quite a few weeks.
Okay, so you mentioned Mark Rutte, and we heard a little quote from him a second ago. Let's hear another one, because the NATO chief had plenty to say, and it wasn't easy listening for the Europeans. But he also said that the United States needs Europe. Just have a listen to this, if you would.
You cannot defend the US without a safe Atlantic. And you need NATO to keep the Atlantic safe. Look at the nuclear submarines the Russians have who might want to sail towards the US coasts. And you cannot keep the US safe without a safe Europe. And the Americans know this. All the senior policy makers from the White House down to the State Department, the Pentagon, they all know this. And they all agree with this.
Donald Jensen, what do you make of that? Is Donald Trump aware of it too, but is just kind of forcing the Europeans' hand to up their defense ante?
Well, I think Donald Trump, in this remarkable security strategy published last week, is basically saying we want the war to end. We want a collaborative relationship with Russia. And frankly, Europe is no longer as high a priority as it was for President Biden and his predecessors, including Trump. So what we're having now is an earthquake in European leadership perspective about what the Atlantic leadership relationship means. And instead of trying to manipulate the U.S. president, the Europeans are now forced to come up with alternative ways of ensuring Ukraine's security. And after all, security guarantees are at the center of this, just as President Trump has signaling he's pulling back, leaning back from a closer relationship with Europe. And this causes major diplomatic headaches in capitals of Europe, as it should, because they're now having to reassess their entire relationship, not only with Washington, but also other non-European capitals, just as Russia seems, and from the quote he's played, we can see, that Russia seems to be more threatening and aggressive.
Okay, but what did you make? What did you make of what Mark Rutte was saying there, that you cannot defend the United States without a safe Atlantic? You need NATO, the United States needs NATO to keep the Atlantic safe.
Well, that's something I would agree with. The problem is not everybody in Washington puts that proposition as high on their priority list as Brussels and NATO do. And that's part of the problem, because the U.S. sees NATO as a place where they've spent a lot of money with marginal cost. That's their view. And the Europeans see the relationship with Washington as central to European security. So what we're seeing now, we're seeing the Ukraine war become a bigger crisis in European security, whereas Zelenskyy and the Europeans are moving together to a formula that might work. Washington is leaning back, let's say pulling back, and the Russians are watching, trying to manipulate this process to their advantage. And what's their advantage? a weak, divided West, a U.S. which is no longer interested in Europe, and a peace settlement which keeps Ukraine under the thumb of Moscow. That's the danger. That's the danger that we're just talking about. And frankly, as you see in negotiations the last few days, they haven't agreed yet on what to do about this.
Okay, good to have your perspective. Appreciate that. Donald Jensen speaking to us there from Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.